We have another live we're going to do today. So Jennifer Crumbley, who is the mom of Ethan Crumbley, who actually went and unfortunately took a gun to school, killed several of his classmates, even a teacher or two, I think. Very unfortunate, horrible situation. His parents were the first parents in America to also get in trouble because of the actions of their son. They ended up being charged with manslaughter. They were found guilty, and they were set to be in prison for a very long time. I will say in this case, some other ones don't necessarily fit the bill, but for this one, the parents knew that he was having issues. They knew that he was hearing people talk to him in his head, and they never did one thing about it. Very unfortunate. I think parents need to be way more proactive. And that is also why this entire case was such a big deal, because at least for them, they could have prevented this, and they didn't. And so now they are held accountable. However, they are now in prison, and the mom is attempting to appeal and is begging literally to be released from the prison. So we're going to go ahead and watch. Her lawyer was on court TV, so that's what we are going to watch together. I'm very curious to see what they have to say, and if it even makes sense at all for that to happen.
Morning, breaking news out of Michigan in the school shooter's mom case. The Oxford school shooter, Ethan Crumbley's mother, Jennifer Crumbley, is asking to be released from prison pending her appeal. Her historic trial played out right here on Court TV earlier this year. She, along with her husband, James, they were the first parents of a school shooter to be charged and then convicted for their child's actions. Both Jennifer and James Crumbley were found guilty of 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, one for each victim in the 2021 Oxford High School shooting committed by their son, Ethan. But during Jennifer's trial, she took the stand to say that she would not have done things differently.
Of course, I look back after this all happened, and I've asked myself if I would have done anything differently, and I wouldn't have.
If you could change what happened, would you?
Oh, absolutely. I wish he would have killed us instead.
Now, Jennifer is saying through her attorney, her legal team, that she wants out of her 10 to 15-year prison sentence as she waits for her appeal to be determined. So we want to break all of this down. We have a very special guest with us. Jennifer Crumbley's defense attorney for her appeal, Michael Desi, is with us. Michael, thank you so much for taking the time out to break this down for our viewers who watched this trial, who understood the historic nature of Jennifer Crumbley and her husband's case. Let us know what prompted this particular motion for her release pending her appeal.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. I mean, essentially, it boils down to the fact that we don't believe Mrs. Crumbley committed any crime. And in Michigan, the law provides that a defendant can seek release from prison, even pending appeal, if they can prove 2 things. One, they have to prove that they're not a danger to society. And the second thing they have to prove is that they have a substantial defense and some substantial argument to make on appeal as to why they think the case should be thrown out. And we easily satisfy at least the first of those requirements. There's no allegation that Mrs. Crumbley herself is dangerous. She's not accused of committing any crimes or engaging in any assaultive behavior. So as to the second component of that, we also believe that we're on very solid ground in asking the court to throw this case out for the simple fact that there's just simply no duty to compel somebody to prevent the intentional criminal acts of a third person. And it doesn't matter if that third person is your son or your husband or your...
So what do you think? Do you think her parents should be held, or his parents should be held accountable? Do you think that that's too long of a sentence for what this is, that she didn't have any involvement, she wasn't the one who did this? Or do you think their negligence was impactful enough and could have been stopped, and so she should be punished?
Your brother or simply a stranger. It's always been the law. It's in the law in Michigan as well as most all of the states. It has always been the law that an individual doesn't have a duty to protect other people from the intentional criminal acts of others. So essentially that's what we have here. You know, when you have people talk about how historic this case is and it's unprecedented and it's never been brought before, I mean, there's a simple reason it's never been brought before. It's because it's not illegal. Mrs. Crumbley didn't do anything wrong. She wasn't aware of what her son was planning. He made that clear, and at least in some allegations that he's made, that he did this behind his parents' back.
And I do want to talk to you more about the historic nature of this case, but back to this request for a release pending appeal. Is this going to be with the same judge? And what do you think is going to be different, since during the trial and before the trial, between the incident and the trial, there was not this ability for them to get bail?
Sure. So the motion is going to be heard and decided by the original trial court judge, Judge Matthews, at the Oakland County Circuit Court. And depending on the outcome of that hearing with the judge, we can certainly then exercise our right to appeal. We can ask the Michigan Court of Appeals to review that, and we can also ultimately ask the Michigan Supreme Court to review that decision to grant or deny her motion for bond. The law does allow for an individual to seek bond while they are pending their appeals. I mean, and the reason for that is simple. I mean, these cases can take years. You know, it wouldn't be an understatement to say that this could take 3, 4, 5 years for this case to wind its way through the courts, the Michigan appellate courts. You know, and it simply isn't fair to keep somebody incarcerated when there is a very strong likelihood that they could potentially be, they could have the case thrown out by the appellate courts. So the reason I think it's different is because at this point, the arguments that have been raised in the case, they weren't previously addressed by the court. So this is the first time that anyone has raised the argument that there simply is no legal duty upon which to premise these types of involuntary manslaughter charges. And in the absence of a duty, there simply isn't a crime. So that is the issue we've asked the trial court to decide first in a motion for judgment of acquittal, which is also pending before the trial court judge. And depending on how she rules on that motion, then that will also be taken up on appeal to most likely the Michigan Court of Appeals and eventually the Michigan Supreme Court. And I do think there's a very strong likelihood that the case will be heard by the Michigan Supreme Court, given, as you've indicated, the historic nature and the unprecedented nature of these charges.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand that January 8th hearing is when we could hear a decision from the judge. Can you talk about what will happen at that hearing? And also let us know, does Jennifer have any communication with her other family members who are incarcerated, or would this release pending appeal allow her to be able to speak to, in particular, Ethan?
Yeah, so what's going to happen is the motion currently is scheduled for January 8th. It's certainly possible that the court could change that date, but as of now, that is the date that's been scheduled. So what I would expect is on the 8th, we're going to go to court and we're going to argue the motion for acquittal. We'll also argue in the alternative, if the judge doesn't grant an acquittal, that she should grant a new trial, because there were several procedural errors and trial errors that occurred in the case that I believe render the jury's verdict infirm. And just most notably, if we could just talk about that, you know, let's not forget that the prosecution withheld 2 agreements, which, you know, we can call them secret agreements because they were secret from the defense. And the defense did not know and was not made aware that the 2 star prosecution witnesses had received agreements with the prosecution to cooperate and testify against Mrs. Crumbley. So that issue is also first and foremost in front of the court, which is the prosecution's suppression of this evidence that the jury never heard. So we also believe that that is important for the court to consider those arguments when it's considering whether it should grant a new trial or whether it's going to grant a dismissal and an acquittal of the case. Beyond that, I don't want to get into the specifics of what Mrs. Crumbley is communicating, but you know, she's hopeful that we have arguments that the court's going to give us a fair hearing and that the court's going to take seriously the allegations that have been raised in her motions, and that we believe eventually some court in this process is going to throw this case out.
Michael Desi, thank you so much for breaking all of that down for us, helping us to understand how this is going to move through.
So what do you think? Do you think it's going to be thrown out like he seems to be so confident about? I mean, I'm a parent, so part of me understands, like, if they do something wrong, why am I being tied to it? We're all individuals. But I think, especially for them, that they could have prevented this. I also really wish I knew what the family dynamic is currently. In court, both the parents said that they love you to each other, but we know that Jennifer was having an affair for quite a while. So I wonder if this is helping them grow back together, or if by the time this is all said and done, they're going to hate each other. It'll be interesting. But I am inclined to think that they're not going to have her be able to appeal. I think that she is going to serve her sentence. Like I said, it seems like he was pretty confident that somebody will throw it out. But I don't know. Our country as a whole has been trying to find ways to deal with this issue. And I think that this is one of the great ways. It has to have parents be paying attention to their kids, know when things are off or wrong, take things seriously, because something like this could happen. And then what? People have to be held accountable. So I do think that they will get it. I think that it's necessary, especially if the parents really have dropped the ball that bad. I'm sure there's occasions that they really do everything in their power to help the person, and then something awful happens. That would be different. But they had enough stuff in text messages alone to confirm that they really weren't being hands-on. They weren't listening to his cries for help, which he literally did for like months. And I think that they just didn't take him seriously. So it is a complete shame. It's horrible. It'll be interesting to see what happens when they go back in. I believe they said that was January 8th. So we'll have to keep watching it for sure. Also, one to watch out for is I believe it was Georgia school shooting, and that dad was also arrested, and they're building their case against him. But we do know that he was having many issues, the son was, and then as a Christmas present, I think, or birthday, but during all of those issues, he bought his son a gun. It's just crazy. We also know that the mom, who didn't live with him at the time, she received a message from him, and it concerned her so much that she called the school that morning and said, "You need to find him. You need to get him out of there. I will come straight there, but you need to find him and get him." Well, they ended up not being able to locate him. They pulled a boy with the same name out of class and not the right boy. So that also was so close to being prevented, and unfortunately, it just didn't get passed along in time fast enough. So we will definitely see. Like I said, I think that some parents need to be made an example, and I think that they are going to continue to be those parents. All right, it was a good one. Let me know down below in the comments what you think, and I will see you on the next one.